This is just getting rid of any potential conflicts of interest with that individual. Quite honestly, this came from constituents in my district who had concerns in an environment where there's a lack of confidence for some of my constituents in the election process itself. I think the optics of a Secretary of State running their own election for governor and then certifying that election was a major concern to some of my constituents, and that is why I put forth this bill. A few weeks after the 2022 election, 72% of likely voters agreed that Arizona elections were, and this I quote, botched. A different survey, which I thought was very interesting, 65% of Democrats were not feeling that the Maricopa County election was run well and fair. Specifically with the Secretary of State, the main issue is conflict of interest. So if you look at the definition of conflict of interest, it occurs when an entity, or in this case, it would be an individual, becomes unreliable because of a clash between personal or self-serving interests and professional duties and responsibilities. Such a conflict occurs when a company or person has a vested interest, such as money, status, knowledge, etc. And so that can potentially put into question the actions or judgment of that individual.
There was a situation where at least two counties, I believe it was Cochise and Yavapai, were actually concerned about the integrity of the election, and they wanted to withhold certification, and she actually threatened them with all manner of lawsuits and things if they didn't certify.
It was threats of jail time coming from attorney Mark Elias, and people were very scared down there in Cochise County, specifically one of the Cochise County Board of Supervisors, and they certified that election under duress.
Mr. Elias represents the Secretary of State in legal matters.
The Secretary of State wrote a letter to the Cochise County attorney intimating that if the boards proceeded with their objections, that they might be engaging in some sort of criminal conduct. That letter came to the Cochise County attorney. He then breached attorney-client privilege and released his privilege advice to his clients into public in an attempt to dissuade the Cochise County Board of Supervisors from exercising their discretion as elected officials.
In the election of 1872, many secretaries of state were complicit in rigging elections to varying degrees and generated the largest election controversy in our nation's history, the Tilden versus Hayes presidential election. Isolated instances of SOS controversy continued throughout the 1900s to the point where now, at long last, we are finally making headway into the common sense position that an election official should not oversee their own race. As recently as 2020, Republican Spencer Cox, Utah's top election official, had recused himself from overseeing his own race when running for governor. At the exact same time, Democrat Maggie Toulouse had also recused herself from a potential statewide recount of her own race. This should be uncontroversial. This should be bipartisan.
I do represent the League of Women Voters as the League's professional lobbyist. Respectfully, we do oppose 2308.
Whether or not you believe that our elections have been corrupted, that there's no doubt when the person running for office is also running the election that fraud and corruption are major possibilities.
It's rare sometimes that you get a bill in any political office that seems so obvious and apparent that you have to wonder if it's partisanship that makes you vote against it. And this is such a bill. I think if you stopped any Arizonan on the street and asked them, do you think an elected official who's running for office should be allowed to administer their own election and run that? There's no question they would all agree no. This bill doesn't require that the Secretary of State resign to run. It doesn't require that the Secretary of State take any other action other than to say if she is the candidate, they'll recuse themselves and wall themselves off and will not manage those elections. And as Republicans and Democrats, we should be able to come together and agree that that's a good thing.
That's a very good bipartisan precedent.
This is codifying best practice, and with that I vote aye.
To me, it seems like this should be the most bipartisan of bipartisan bills because it's just absolute common sense where we absolutely wouldn't accept a situation in any other walk of life or any other important position of trust where such a conflict could happen as an elected official deciding whether to certify their own election. And for those reasons, I vote aye.
I echo the comments of many of my colleagues. I think this is a good step in the right direction of rebuilding confidence in elections. There are clearly many people on both sides of the aisle that have realized there's concerns. And so this is a common sense, potentially bipartisan solution that I think is a really good step in the right direction. And with that, I vote aye.